And once again, we are back here on Living in the 21st Century this beautiful Saturday morning. Joining me today is Yelena Beriyeva, and she is a teacher at the Clark's University in Worcester. Yelena, it's good to have you here on the show. I know you're one of the great pianists out there. Tell me a little bit about um, your thoughts and how you got into being such a great pianist.
Errol, good afternoon, and everybody, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure, and it's been a while since we've spoken, so it's really nice to reconnect. So my musical journey started when I was very, very young, about 3 years old. And that was when my mom discovered that I had perfect pitch. She was a teacher. She was teaching her own students, and some of them would visit our place, our apartment. And after they left, I would get to the piano and repeat some of the things that they were playing. I didn't really have technique at 3 years old, but I was able to identify the keys and just maybe pluck out some, phrases, couple selections with a couple of fingers. But I was getting the notes exactly the same way. And so that's how it all started. Then when I turned 5 years old, I was already at the Central Music Gymnasium of the capital, which is at Tbilisi of the Republic of Georgia. And ever since, it was basically predetermined for me to become a professional musician, because my entire school years, my musical practicing and concertizing was taken very seriously. So there was basically no choice for me except to become a professional classical musician. But I'm glad I did. And after many years, after I finished gymnasium and the conservatory back in my country, I moved to the United States, continued my studies a little bit here as well. My last school that I attended for my graduate studies was New England Conservatory in Boston. And so I was, in the meantime, participating in competitions, doing recitals, solo recitals, chamber music recitals, had various partners, instrumentalists, as well as the vocalists. So quite diverse group of people, musicians, huge selection of repertoire, and various venues, sometimes professional music hall, sometimes a house concert, sometimes a church, sometimes a retirement community, but anywhere where I could play, make music, collaborate, I was happy to do so. And then eventually I got the invitation to teach at Clark University, which I happily accepted, and that was where I found, new partners, musical partners, colleagues, and we have a very nice team there, and we collaborate as many times as we can each year for the performances for various programs.
Beautiful.
And I also do some teaching, piano teaching, and I coach chamber ensembles. So it's a variety of obligations there for me, but of course, so happy to be there.
Well, Alina, we first met at the Mechanics Hall in Worcester,
Yes.
and we were doing a show there called Jewel of All Nations. And we had great performing artists from around the world, Russia, Canada, you name it, the best was there. And you were the person at the keyboard. What that moment meant to you then?
It was quite interesting. I remember it was a really big program. There were quite a good number of singers, professional singers, as you mentioned, from all over the world. and the variety of the program was absolutely huge. Representing different cultures, different languages, different styles of art songs. Selections from the operas, solo selections, as well as ensembles, duets, quartets. So it was quite interesting. And yes, you're correct. I was the only piano collaborator for that night. We had 2 meetings, I believe, if I remember correctly. We had 2 meetings during which we were rehearsing and figuring out, the final program for the concerts. And it was actually my first, I believe maybe my first time performing in Mechanics Hall. So that was quite lovely. The room is so warm, and the piano was really well managed and beautiful. And I loved the touch of the piano, and the stage was really interestingly, constructed for everybody to enter and leave. So I remember that being an entertaining performance, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, just discovering even more new repertoire, and especially collaborating with new people. That was quite exciting.
That's beautiful. I'm going to put you on the spot now. So
okay.
I'm doing a recording for the season back in October. We're going to do it here in the studio. Can I leverage on having you come to perform?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
we are in Attleboro. That's probably like 45 minutes away from where you live. If you're in Worcester, right? You live in Worcester?
I live in Marlborough.
Marlborough. Okay, well, that should be probably a little bit closer. But yes, we'll chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would be happy to.
Definitely. Yeah, so getting back to you in your music career. Now, I know you teaches. Does the students you teach are inspired by who you are as an artist, one of the greats, or do your image just tell them, what I want to be like her? Could you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Well, I mean, perhaps when I teach, I just I don't think about those things. I just try to share my knowledge as much as I can with the younger generation. I try to influence them positively, and obviously use my own, tricks, how to get from point A to point B, how to, maybe sometimes there are talks about how to be less nervous, how to memorize better. So there are so many talks, different topics that each student might be experiencing during certain stages of their studies. And at the end of the day, I think I do make positive impression, and I do end up being in some ways at least inspirational. But I did hear that from some of the students, so I'm not just saying that from the air, out of the air. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think about that really when I teach, or when I try to portray some of the musical ideas that I have. And if I end up being an inspiration to some students, I'm so happy about that. But while the progress of going from lesson to lesson to lesson to lesson, from the beginning, from the scratch to the final project, whether it's the juries or the performance, it's just those thoughts never go through my mind, and it's just work. And
yes, why I ask that question is that I know that when you play, it comes with so much grace and soul behind it. And that kind of magnetic field draws people to greatness also. So I was just trying to figure out if that happens when you teach your kids. Right. So you mentioned you start this music career, well, not career, but from the age of 3 years old.
Yes.
As you move from one stage to the next, did you have a vision of what you intend to become at this juncture in your life? as a pianist?
I suppose, yes. I mean, essentially, when I was very, very young, I was just mostly participating in school performances. I would not travel until I was maybe 11 years old. I think the first time I traveled when I was 11. So not from the very, very young age. But I mean, I was still young at 11, but not 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. And so there was a lot of just the practice room, so to speak, practice room situation going on, just getting better every day without necessarily trying. It was just kind of like on a daily basis to get better, to acquire more repertoire. And maybe when I was 5, 6, 7, I didn't really know what I was dreaming about. I was so young, and I was just trying to study well and do what people would tell me to do. My parents, my teachers. But then eventually when I got a little bit older, when I started to explore and get the taste of the international stage, then I suppose during my teenage years, I sort of started to dream about where I would want to be, which places I may want to play, maybe some travels. And then I ended up doing that. I ended up traveling to many countries, performing either in the competition or in the concert settings, which was essentially what I was dreaming to do. I love traveling and performing for the audiences. It could be a small audience or big audience. I had some audiences of about 10 people. I had some audiences of about 800 people. So it always feels the same, whether I share a little bit of myself with 10 people or 800 people or 1,000 people. It's still the same feeling, of being in front of the audience and doing what I love doing. So I don't know if that answers your question or if it shapes the idea in any way. But I would say maybe a little bit later when I started to travel, I got a taste of it and decided that I really loved that and wanted to do that.
So at your first international performance, what was going through your mind from there on? Did you see the vision clear of who you really are at this point as a pianist?
So my first international traveling started with the competitions and international auditions and competitions. So at that point, I was just primarily focused on doing my best. Mm-hmm. And, at that point, I didn't really consider myself as an artist, mm-hmm. but I just considered myself as a student. So I was still in that mode of, trying to do what my teachers would tell me to do. So I think only after I finished my studies and sort of tried to find my own style, it was the combination of my own visions, my own musical intuitions, my skills, my teachers from the past. It was combination of everything, being in touch with a couple of different cultures, living in 2 different countries for a long time. So I think once I got a little bit older, perhaps in my, early 20s, I started to just really think about developing my own musical personality and style. So that was a nice point when I got there, because I realized I don't have to, depend on anybody anymore, and I could just be free to discover my own interpretations, and they would be justified.
Great. So outside the music career and the music world, what other pattern do your life takes on?
I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
Okay, that's okay. So outside of your professional career, what other pattern do your life take on?
What other patterns?
Or professional patterns, or?
Well, I suppose the majority of my life is
music.
It's definitely music, and also just most recently, I would say last 10 years, I started to teach, And when I was younger, I never thought that I could be a teacher. I was so focused on myself, and maybe now I would say it's actually more than 10 years. Yeah, I think it's more than that.
Oh.
I would say like at least 15 years. But I would say that it was kind of tricky for me to start. I mean, I didn't really transition because I've been doing two things at the same time, but just to get to the point where I'm no longer a student and I'm a teacher now. So it took me some time to also try to discover that and find myself in that emploi. But I have to say that I absolutely love teaching. And, at the end of the day, I'm happy to share my knowledge, and especially with the people who are excited about music, are interested about the music and different composers and variety of the repertoire or even styles. Mm-hmm. It's a real pleasure to also be doing teaching. So I would say that's the majority of my professional life. That's basically music and equally sharing performance and teaching.
Okay. So one of the questions I want to ask, because as we go from one generation to the next, we recognize that there's a slight or heavy or slight to medium phase out of the classical world. And classical music is a very potent music. It goes beyond just a piano. It goes beyond just a violin or a guitar or some other instrument. I view classical as music strictly for the soul. We have seen it, even I think there were some doctors in Russia when they were performing surgeries that used to use classical as a way to get that person in a very mild phase of their life so they can carry on the surgery. I don't even think they use anesthesia. I'm not sure, but something pertaining to that. What would you want to tell school teachers or those who write programs for music at school, the importance of preserving classical music? We know it's potent. We know it from Sebastian, from Tchaikovsky and Mozart and those. It still lives on today. It's still potent. It's still vibrant. You hear a piece today is just as good as if you heard it 50, 60 years ago. What would be your word to say to musicians today to keep the legacy and the preservation of classical and opera still going? Because I love it. And people often ask me, well, how come you love classical? That's not a part of your culture. But I grew up in a community that we only had one radio guided by one station in our country. Mm-hmm. And all that used to do is play classical. So I grew up listening to classical. It was a part of my life. And at that age, I couldn't tell you exactly how I used to feel at certain pieces, when certain pieces of music are played. It used to do something in transforming my mentality and putting me in a different comfort zone, so to speak. What would you want to say to musicians of the importance today of preserving classical music and the operas because of its refreshness to the mind?
It's an interesting question, and obviously
that's a tough one.
A bit tough one. Okay. A bit tough one. It's I would say it doesn't just, I don't think there's a single answer to that. It really depends on where people come from.
Yes.
And what they're exposed to. Mm-hmm. And, before, a century ago, we didn't have, Lady Gaga's and Justin Bieber's
right.
and, all of this pop stuff, just so dynamic. Everything is so dynamic today. And last several decades, and those artists are, they deserve success because they work hard. It's just a completely different world. But kids who grow up today, they have access to everything. kids from the young age, they watch television, they look at iPads, iPods, and they have access to all of this, music stations. And, I think naturally people, and especially younger generation, they're attracted to something that's dynamic, not very long. And with the classical music, I think the music pieces are generally longer. And I would say with the singers, I would say the vocal repertoire is in a way a little bit more attractive because some of the solo scenes or some of the art songs could be just several minutes long versus a sonata, like instrumental sonata or concerto that's 25, 30, 40 minutes long. And so I think it's just the matter of younger generation not being patient enough to try to acquire such a long, same for so many minutes. And I think it really depends on teachers at the end of the day. And every student, I believe, needs to have, a special approach. I feel like teachers have to approach each student in the way that's comfortable for the student. And for people who are doing music for fun, I think it's okay to combine different styles. I think it's okay to keep learning classical and also maybe try to learn a song from the movie that they like, or some like really popular song that they really love. And I think it's good to have the combination. I think at the end of the day, it comes to the ways that each student can be engaged. When we're talking about serious and older students who are already at the universities or conservatories, we don't have to necessarily discuss that because everybody's minds, are set on, developing this particular style. And even some classical musicians that I know and collaborated with, they occasionally like to play something that's not necessarily always classical. So especially with the kids, it definitely takes a certain approach to try to keep them interested and excited. Maybe some stories associated with the composers, maybe talking about the variety of the instruments, the variety of styles. If they're playing piece by Bach, for example, I think it's good to, and very educational to talk to them about the Baroque style, and not just necessarily music, but also to show them the Baroque artists, the painters, the architecture, a little bit of the history. So I feel like some of these things, it's not just like, oh, let's play piece by Bach, and you have to do it, you must do it because Bach is the greatest composer. But also try to go a little bit around and see, how this composer lived, what was his lifestyle like, what was happening around in this country, in this time period, on the continent, and, culturally during those times. So I think those are some of the things that we could also attach to, to learning a musical instrument, a little bit of the history, and talking about the variety of the instruments, how the piano today was never the case several centuries ago, and how people who wrote for keyboards had very limited, instruments and range. So some of those things I like to talk to my students about, and I think it keeps them interested.
That's correct. So as you go from one level to the next in your career, what would you like your legacy to be like when you look back upon your years of music? What would you want to see your legacy seal as then?
I would like, just generally speaking, I would like people to have appreciation for music. I would like people to have appreciation for classical music. And I think it's very, very important for every person, for every child to study music at some point in their lives. Not everybody needs to become professional musician. It's not necessary, because everybody has their own passion. Somebody's interested in history. Somebody wants to become historian or a doctor or an engineer or, game developer or, million other professions. Somebody is interested in law. But while they have, all these dreams of becoming somebody, I think it's really important for for everybody to study music a little bit, because I think it does something interesting to our brains, and we look at things differently. We appreciate certain things, and so I would like to see younger generation and all of the following generations to have appreciation for music and appreciation for the efforts that it takes to become a professional classical musician, even if they don't dream of it themselves. So I would say lessons are important for everybody at a certain stage of their lives. So that's what I would like to see as a general idea.
Beautiful. And the final question I have for you, would you say that over the past 60 years, that the popularity of classical music and opera had somewhat diminished a little, or is it still full of strength?
I would like to believe that it's full of strength, because there are still a bunch of concerts happening. Yes, we had this, couple of years where we suffered a little bit recently, but I think generally speaking, people love going to, and of course I have to say yes, mostly older generation, but once in a while I see, younger people, tuning into the classical radios and talking about their friend. I have a couple younger students that I work with, and they tell me, "Oh, my friend, he just learned this piece by Schubert, and he's so good. He's so good. I really want to play like my friend. I want to be like my friend." So I wouldn't say that it's completely dying or anything. I think kids are still excited to get better at something, and a lot depends on how the situation is in the family, like if there's an overall appreciation for the music, for the arts, that makes huge difference for the kids. If the parents and the family are talking about it and, exploring these topics. Yes.
Thank you so much, Yelena, for really coming on and educating us to this world of classical music and your career. We come to the end of our program. We will chat soon. And for all those who are tuning in, I want to say thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye-bye.